Well, folks, it's official. The US-China rivalry has entered a new phase, and the battleground is Africa. This continent holds some of the richest natural resources on Earth, some of the most critical trade routes in the world, and the fastest-growing economies of the 21st century. What happens here could define the global order for decades to come. Now, for centuries, Africa was exploited as a supplier of raw materials. But today, things are changing. For the first time in modern history, African nations have real choices in who they partner with. And those choices could reshape the balance of power. On one side, China offers infrastructure, investment, and economic inclusion. And on the other, the United States leans on military power, sanctions, and security guarantees. These competing visions are now colliding in one of the most strategic regions on Earth, the Horn of Africa. And this is where things get very interesting. Roughly 30% of global container traffic flows through these waters. Control them, and you don't just influence Africa, you gain leverage over the entire world economy. And at the center of it all is one small country you've probably never even heard of, but it could decide whether the US or China wins the future of Africa and global trade. Let's break it down. But first, give me a minute of your time as I introduce today's video sponsor, PDS Debt, who might be able to help you with your personal finances. Let's be honest, are credit card bills, personal loans, or medical debt keeping you up at night? Trust me, I've been there. You work hard, but it feels like your money is working for everyone except you. The truth is, high interest debt is designed to keep you trapped, but there is a way out, and it starts with PDS Debt. PDS Debt is different from anything you've tried before. They don't just throw a generic plan at you. They use their own technology to look at your unique situation and find the best path forward. Whether it's credit cards, personal loans, collections, or medical bills, there's no minimum credit score required. They've already helped over 102,000 Americans resolve more than $500 million in debt. And they've got a 4.9 star rating on both Google and Trustpilot, plus an A+ with a Better Business Bureau. Imagine paying off your debt faster, saving more money, and finally putting those payments back into your savings account instead of your creditor's pocket. It all starts with a free 30-second debt assessment. Just go to pdsdebt.com/Cyrus or scan the QR code right here on the screen. Don't wait. Every day you delay is costing you money. Take back control today at pdsdebt.com/Cyrus. For a long time, Africa was left behind. In the 1800s, European powers carved the continent into colonies built for one purpose: extracting resources. The artificial borders drawn by colonial settlers and exploitative systems left behind weak economies and political instability that still shape the continent today. Even after independence, most nations stayed stuck in that same role, exporting raw materials while the West keep the profits from manufacturing. And whenever a country tried to break free, government coups and regime changes kept pro-Western governments in place. The result was a cycle that left Africa poor and politically weak for decades. But today, things are changing. China's Belt and Road Initiative is funding infrastructure the West ignored or only offered with strings attached. More African nations are moving away from the US dollar, trading in local currencies, or directly in Chinese renminbi. And on the world stage, China is pushing reforms at the United Nations, giving the Global South a louder voice and challenging a system long dominated by American veto power. For the first time in history, African nations are starting to compete in the global economy on more equal terms. And while Western media wants you to believe that China has nefarious intentions in Africa, the truth is that China is genuinely popular throughout the region. Just look at this report from the Asia Society, which highlights the global public opinion on China. Countries in red have a favorable view of China, and the conclusion of this report says the quiet part out loud. China is not simply making inroads in Africa by cultivating elites. It is genuinely popular. Positive views of China among citizens in sub-Saharan Africa have outweighed negative views by a factor of about 3-to-1 across nearly 300 surveys in the region. That data point is absolutely fascinating. This is the largest sampling size of genuine African voices published from a Western think tank. And the simple truth is, Africans see China as a positive influence in the region. And for Washington, that's a big problem. At the center of this entire ordeal is the Gulf of Aden, one of the world's most important trade choke points. Every ship passing between Europe and Asia has to pass through this narrow corridor, and lately it's become a conflict zone. Yemeni Houthis launched a partial blockade, targeting ships bound for Israel in response to the war in Gaza. Yet Chinese vessels, including massive BYD container ships loaded with cars, have sailed through these waters without incident, likely because of Beijing's support for Palestine and its BRICS partner Iran. For the US, that was intolerable. The United States Navy launched a months-long campaign to neutralize the Houthis, burning through ammunition and resources. But in the end, It failed. Washington couldn't stop their operations and was forced to settle for a peace deal, a humiliating outcome. Given the volatility of the region, the U.S. needs reliable partners to anchor its naval presence, and for years, Djibouti has played that role. Washington set up a base there in 2002, and in 2017, China followed with its own, Beijing's only overseas military base. Djibouti has tried to stay neutral, allowing U.S. operations against only non-state actors, like pirates or Al-Qaeda. But recently, it refused America's request to launch strikes against Yemen's Houthis, whom it recognizes as a legitimate actor. That angered Washington, which accused Djibouti of siding with China and the Houthis. As a result, U.S. officials began looking for a new partner. Their eyes turned next door to Somaliland. Strategically located on Somalia's northern coast, just across from Yemen, it offers almost the same geography as Djibouti. The difference? Somaliland is desperate for recognition. It declared independence in 1991 and has run its own government ever since, with its own passport, elections, and currency. But to this day, no country in the world officially recognizes it. Now, reports suggest that Donald Trump is considering a deal, recognizing Somaliland as a country in exchange for a U.S. military base along its coast to counter China's influence in the region. This is honestly a last-ditch effort from the Americans to gain leverage in the continent, as China has become Africa's #1 partner for the future. Earlier this year, 53 of 54 African nations pledged their allegiance to China for its future. And I think this quote from French geopolitical analyst Arnaud Bertrand says it best. Never before has a rising power managed to secure the coordinated support of an entire continent and a comprehensive trade plan to reshape global governance. With so much leverage in Africa, Washington is now desperate to make a move and do anything they can to slow down the Chinese. If the U.S. recognized Somaliland, this would be a direct shot at Beijing, but this gamble also comes with major risks. First and foremost, it would infuriate Somalia. This is a country that Trump once included on his infamous 2018 list of so-called hole nations. If Somaliland were suddenly recognized, Somalia would almost certainly cut ties with Washington. That could mean ending cooperation on deportations of undocumented Somalis, refusing to take back failed asylum seekers, and halting the transfer of criminals. Even more serious, it could mean ripping up existing security agreements with the United States, including access to multiple U.S. military bases used for anti-terror operations and broader regional influence. And yet, despite all these dangers, Washington appears willing to put everything on the line, just for a chance to counter Chinese influence in Africa. But the idea of recognizing Somaliland isn't new. In fact, it's been floating around conservative circles for years. The Heritage Foundation even included it in their Project 2025 policy blueprint, calling on Washington to develop powerful public diplomacy efforts to counter Chinese influence campaigns and to recognize Somaliland as a hedge against U.S. weakness in Djibouti, while boosting American business interest in Africa. Somaliland, for its part, has aggressively pursued recognition. Officials have hired a lobbying firm in Washington with deep Republican ties, building relationships with congressional conservatives, think tanks, and former Trump officials. And quite frankly, it's paying off. Republican Congressman Scott Perry has already introduced a bill calling for formal recognition of Somaliland. In return, Somaliland promises a U.S. naval base at the port of Berbera, along the country's northern coast. Officials frame this deal as a direct challenge to China with the president. In fact, just take a look at how the New York Times article is even wording this story. African breakaway state offers U.S. a chance to stick it to China. While most African nations are leaning towards China, Somaliland has gone all in on its future with the U.S. and its promise of recognition. This situation highlights the stark choice facing countries across the continent. Washington offers little beyond military bases and security operations, while China delivers roads, ports, and long-term development. For most nations, the better deal is obvious. But for Somaliland, the calculus is completely different. This isn't about economics. It's existential. Recognition could finally legitimize them as a state after more than 3 decades in the shadows. And with conflict in the Middle East showing no signs of slowing down, Trump's inner circle has proven highly vulnerable to lobbying and foreign influence, even accepting a $400 million jet from Qatar. That makes it entirely possible that Washington could move forward with recognition. If it does, the consequences would be disastrous. It would deliberately escalate tensions between Somalia and Somaliland, put countless lives at risk, and all for a single purpose: not to stabilize Africa, but to increase pressure on China, even at the larger risk of sparking a larger conflict. This Somaliland episode is just one example of a much bigger story. Africa has become the stage where the balance of global power is being decided. For the first time in history, African nations have the power to choose, and their choice will ripple far beyond the continent. The Horn of Africa, sitting at the gateway between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, is now the front line of this contest. Djibouti's neutrality, Somalia's fragile statehood, and Somaliland's desperate push for recognition show just how high the stakes have become. What happens here won't stay regional. The decisions made in these coastal cities could shape Africa's role in the world for decades to come, and ultimately decide whether the 21st century belongs to Washington or Beijing. Everyone, I want to thank you for making it to this point of the video, and I hope you have found today's deep dive into Somalia, Somaliland, and the future of Africa a fascinating case study of how important global geopolitics is. Stuff like this absolutely fascinates me, because right now, the future of the United States and China most definitely is being shaped in Africa. Africa is going to be the most important continent for the future of the 21st century, and this is why the United States and China are so concentrated on gaining influence there. But now, it's time to let me know what you thought of today's video. Do you think the United States will recognize Somaliland as an effort to get back at Beijing, or do you think that China will continue to maintain its dominant position throughout Africa? Let me know down in the comments below. Once again, thank you for your incredible support, and a huge thank you to PDS Debt for sponsoring today's important episode. My name is Cyrus, thanks for being here, and I look forward to seeing you all in our next episode.